Yes, welcome everyone to the Marijuana Time Show for February 9th, 2018. I'm your host, Joe Klare. You find myself and many other great writers over at marijuanatimes.org. Not only can you find a bunch of great articles over there at marijuanatimes.org, you find all of these videos as well. Share them with your social media networks. Every episode of the Marijuana Time Show, I believe this is episode 70. You can go check out marijuanatimes.org. You can also search the Marijuana Times on YouTube and Facebook. If you search the Marijuana Times on Apple Podcasts, you can find the audio-only version of the show. For those of you on the go, and you have your iTunes or whatever set up, play the Marijuana Times show. It's the same as you have to imagine what's going on here. So you have to imagine me talking into a microphone, showing you the stories, of occasionally playing a video, things of that nature. If you can imagine that, then you can go with the audio version of the show. If you can't imagine that, well, take the time to watch the videos. It's the best advice I can give you. Today, we're talking about possible legalization, recreational legalization in Georgia. Talk more about exactly what is going on in Florida. We referenced it in a show earlier this week. Medical marijuana in Florida is just, it's not going. And we'll talk about why that is. And also, Jeff Sessions. Yeah, you remember Jeff Sessions, right? He keeps talking about marijuana, and he keeps proving that in the years since he became Attorney General of the United States, he's done absolutely nothing to learn about marijuana. No effort at all. In 1 full year, he's not made any effort whatsoever to learn anything about marijuana. Seems kind of weird to me, but I'm not the Attorney General. Before we get to all that, of course, tell you about the Marijuana Times proud sponsor, Naturesidecannabis.com. Check out their line of organic, all-natural pesticides. If you're a cannabis cultivator in a state where that is legal, then you need, one, to make sure you're not putting harmful chemicals on your grow that's going to be ingested by people who end up using that cannabis. And two, you have to worry about regulations. There are only certain pesticides that are regulated and approved for use in many states. Well, Natureside is approved in Colorado, Oregon, and Washington for pesticide use on cannabis cultivations. You don't want to run afoul of regulations and lose your growing license, so you want to check out Naturesidecannabis.com. They can help you become regulatory compliant. They can help you make sure that you grow safe and poison-free. Proud sponsor of the Marijuana Times show, Naturesidecannabis.com. This first story comes from marijuanatimes.org. Julia Granowitz tackling this issue over there at the Marijuana Times. Georgia lawmaker introduces a bill to legalize the adult use of cannabis. Now, of course, you can go check out the story. It's linked in the description of this video, as are all the stories and videos that I talk about. In a nutshell, there's a representative or a senator, state senator, Kurt Thompson, introduced a bill that would legalize cannabis for use by and be sold to adults 21 years of older and older, regulating the herb like alcohol. Basically, he introduced it to the legislature. They have to pass it through the legislature to be able to get it on the midterm election ballot this November in Georgia to get in front of the voters. But of course, it's very much a long shot to be able to get this bill through the legislature. And according to Julia, there's not much to it. It's a 2-page bill. It doesn't talk about tax rates or any other kind of regulations. All of that will have to be figured out by the legislature if they pass this, and then the voters approve it in November. If all that happens, then they'll have to set tax rates and all of that. It's SB 614 in Georgia. If you want to call your representatives, if you live in Georgia, make sure you tell them it's SB 614 that you are in support of. And the story goes into what, the tax revenue, he wants the tax revenue to go to, and all that. The bottom line is, obviously, this is a very long shot. Georgia has a very limited CBD law, and that's it. Obviously, it's in the Bible Belt. It's in the South. Many things going against it as far as getting through the legislature. But still, as I pointed out before, the conversation has to get started. When we first started this, medical marijuana was passed in California in 1996, is where you would expect it. If any state was going to pass medical marijuana, it would be California. So the discussion started happening in states where you would expect these discussions to happen. More liberal, progressive areas like the West Coast, the Northeast. But now you see stories about the discussion in, like the state I'm in, Kentucky. They just opened up CBD medical marijuana grow in Texas. So, and other places are talking about this as well. It's going to be on the ballot in Oklahoma in June of this year, medical marijuana, that is. So we've got that. We started the discussion of the places where you think they would start. Then we got that passed. And we got that through, and we're improving on the legalization laws in those places. And now the discussions are happening in places where you would never expect, like Kentucky and Kansas and Texas and in Oklahoma and as I just said, Georgia. So you have to start somewhere. And even if it is a long shot, it doesn't matter. You push. If you live in Georgia, call your representative. SB 614 is what you want to talk about. Make sure they know that you approve of that and you want them to vote on it and pass it so that the voters in Georgia get a chance to vote on recreational legalization this November. Doesn't matter how long of a shot it is. Got to start somewhere. As a wise man once said, a wise man, it was not me. I'm not taking credit for inventing this phrase. If you want to attribute it to me in memes or whatever on the internet, that's fine. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. Was that Confucius? I'm not sure. I have to look that up. Google it. I don't need to look it up. You look it up if you want to know. Do some research. Research on marijuana and research who said the journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step, the first step. I think it's just an ancient Chinese proverb. In any case, you get my point. You have to start the conversation somewhere, and they are doing that. In Georgia, go a little bit south of Georgia into Florida. Lawmakers blast agency over marijuana rules. This is from newschief.com out of Tallahassee. We talked earlier this week about Florida and how things have been bogged down when it comes to regulations for medical marijuana in Florida. And this story gives us a little bit of an insight into why. A joint legislative oversight committee delivered a public shaming to Florida pot czar Christian Bax on Monday, repeatedly chiding the state health official and others as they sat silently while the panel shredded regulations intended to carry out a constitutional amendment that broadly legalized medical marijuana. In 4 separate unanimous votes, the Joint Administrative Procedures Committee objected to a litany of elements included in the rules issued by the Office of Medical Marijuana Use, which Bax heads. You can see him right there. The items under scrutiny range from identification cards for caregivers of sick patients to a provision banning applicants seeking medical marijuana licenses from amending their applications. That particular prohibition conflicts with state law requiring state agencies to give applicants time to correct errors or provide additional information. Senator Kevin Rader, a Delray Beach Democrat who is chairman of the committee, and other lawmakers are angry that Bax and Department of Health lawyers refuse to respond. Now listen to this. Bax and Department of Health lawyers refused to respond to more than a dozen letters from the committee over the past 4 months, identifying concerns with the rules, which went into effect late last year. So this committee oversees what these people are doing. They sent them a dozen letters, more than a dozen letters. Pardon me. I don't want to get that wrong. More than a dozen letters over 4 months. And they did not respond to a single one. To the committee that oversees what they're doing. They got all these letters, and for some reason, Bax or someone else is just like, nah, we have more important things to do than respond to the state congressional committee that oversees what we're doing. But that wasn't it. That wasn't all. Rader also appeared especially incensed by a letter sent to the committee on Friday by Department of Health General Counsel Nicole Geary, the first response from the agency since the committee began demanding answers in October. Geary said changes sought by the Oversight Committee, quote, will cause further delay of the next application cycle and will delay development of the general patient safety regulatory scheme related to such items as edible, marijuana, and pesticides. Frankly, I find these comments to be disingenuous and insulting to the committee, Rader said at the outset of Monday's meeting. And then the health department was aware of the committee's concern for months, Rader said, and then has the audacity to blame the committee and our staff for delaying the process, the senator continued, condemning the health department for adopting a strategy of blaming delays in the rollout on regulations on anything but itself. At some point, I would hope the department would stop looking for a scapegoat and just do its job. Before each of the 4 votes incorporating a total of 17 objectives to items in the rules, Rader asked whether anyone from the health department or the Office of Medical Marijuana Use wanted to respond. Bax, Geary, and a handful of other health department officials remained silent. No defense of their silence for the last 4 months, no defense of the letter sent blaming the congressional committee for quote-unquote further delays that may be incurred because they don't like the rules that the regulatory body came up with. No response to any of that. Later in the article, back says, they're going to take the committee's suggestions and what they said. They have 30 days to respond. They're going to respond in due time, so on and so forth. It's very weird. It's very, very weird. This has been a theme this week. This is the job of these people. They're the Committee for Medical Marijuana Use. It is their job to make these regulations and make sure they're right and get them in a timely manner, get them implemented. They're doing none of that. Absolutely none of that. They don't have time to respond to letters from the committee that oversees what they're doing. It's incredible. In the 4 decades since the creation of the Joint Committee, which oversees whether state agencies have correctly implemented state laws, an agency or department has never ignored requests for information, according to committee coordinator Ken Planty. In 4 decades, that's 40 years. For those of you who are scrambling to Google to look at what a decade is, 40 years. I'm being sarcastic, of course. They've never been ignored. They just ignored them. It's incredible. What is going on? This is your job. You are a regulatory body making regulations for medical marijuana use. Why can't you do that? Now, I understand it's the government and which is the worst part about legalization. The very worst part about marijuana legalization, whether it's medical or recreational, is the fact that it is the government that has to implement these things. There's no competition. This Bax guy and his committee, they don't have competition. It's not like the congressional committee is going to be like, you know what? We gave you guys a chance. Now we're going to somebody else. I drank Pepsi for years. I don't like Pepsi anymore. Now I'm moving to Coke. There's no competition. There's nobody else. So all they get to do is yell at these people and tell them to get their job done and get it together. But if they don't, what are they going to do? What are they going to do about it? They're going to fire and replace them? They might. I doubt it. I think it's going to take a lot for this Christian Bax dude to get fired. A whole lot. And maybe he'll get there. I don't know. I have faith in him. I have faith that he can do enough to get fired. He can underwhelm enough to actually lose his job as the person overseeing this. But the fact that the government's in charge of this, and they had no competition, and there's really no recourse, only means that if they don't do their job, the people that are hurt are medical marijuana patients in Florida. They're still waiting. Still waiting. It's February 9th, 2018. This was passed in 2016, November of 2016, Amendment 2. 71% of the vote, mind you, still waiting, and they're going to wait a lot longer. I'm sorry, if you're a medical marijuana patient in Florida, you are going to wait a lot longer for your medicine. This last story comes from Vox.com. It's our old pal Jeff Sessions. Yeah, you know Jeff Sessions. He's saying more about marijuana. According to him, marijuana helped cause the opioid epidemic. Speaking at the Heritage Foundation to the Reagan Alumni Association this week, Sessions argued that cutting prescription for opioid painkillers is crucial to combating the crisis, since some people started on painkillers before moving on to illicit opioids like heroin and fentanyl. But then he expanded his argument to include, say it with me, cannabis. Quote, the DEA said that a huge percentage of heroin addicts' addiction starts with prescriptions. That may be an exaggerated number. They had it as high as 80%, Sessions said. We think a lot of this is starting with marijuana and other drugs too. Well, that does it then. That's it then, isn't it? We think a lot of this is starting with marijuana and other drugs too. Boy, he sounds like an expert. He sounds like an expert. He sounds like he really knows what he's talking about, and he sounds like he's not guessing at all, in any way, shape, or form. If that's true, it's true that historically a lot of opioid addiction started with prescription painkillers. A 2017 study in addictive behaviors found that 51.9% of people entering treatment for opioid use disorder in 2015 started with prescription drugs, but that number was down from 84.7% in 2005. 33.3% initiated with heroin in 2015, up from 8.7% in 2005. In other words, according to this study, the people with opioid addictions and entering treatment who started with prescription drugs has been dropping, and those who started with heroin has been increasing. But, of course, you have to go back to the gateway theory to say that the cannabis, and the gateway theory, look at gateway theory on Google, and you'll see how many times it's been debunked and how many thorough ways, including one study that showed for every 104 regular cannabis users, there was something like one heroin user and a little more than one cocaine user, something along those lines. It's on normal.org. Search gateway theory on normal.org, and you'll find that study. And of course, you know where the gateway theory came from. If you take 100 heroin addicts, say, and put them in a room, and you ask this 100 heroin addicts, how many of you smoked marijuana? 95 hands are going to go up. And from that, they extrapolate that, well, they started with marijuana, and then they went to heroin, and so it's a gateway drug. But you could also ask those people, how many of you eaten carrots? How many of you have drank milk? How many of you drink water? I hope 100 hands are going to go up. I'm sure a couple of people, nodded out because they're on heroin, but 100 hands are going to go up. Does that mean if you drink water or eat carrots or drink milk that you're going to start doing heroin? Of course not. There's no scientific basis for the gateway theory whatsoever. It has been debunked many, many times over. Because, someone smoked marijuana in their youth and they smoked heroin or shot up heroin or snorted heroin or whatever you do with heroin later in their life, that somehow marijuana led them to that. There's no link there at all. And Vox goes into the research later in this article. Sessions once said that good people don't smoke marijuana. Where he went wrong, Vox says, it's a suggestion that marijuana leads to heroin use, reiterating the old gateway drug theory, as I just said, which is really, it shows where his thinking is. And again, he's done nothing to learn about marijuana. I bet he's not read one single pro-marijuana study, article, not watched one pro-marijuana video. I can tell you for a fact he's never seen an episode of this show. Or he'd be like, oh, I guess that maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was wrong. This weird guy with the facial hair and the Make Cannabis Great Again hat, by the way, makecannabisgreatagain.com if you want this hat, and the Marijuana Times flag, and the Bob Marley in the background. Well, maybe he knows more about marijuana than I do, which I will guarantee you that I do. And that's not bragging, that I know more about cannabis than Jeff Sessions. I mean, that's a pretty low bar. But he's made no effort to learn the other side. I understand he's old. He's from the South. He grew up, believing that black people are evil and they smoke a lot of weed and weed's bad for you and so on and so forth. That's okay. You were brought up that way. Whatever. But it's 2018. There's the internet. Just look at the other side. Look at the other side and then decide. You can't decide on an issue unless you've heard both sides. And Jeff Sessions clearly hasn't heard the pro-legalization side, the pro-cannabis side. I would guarantee that. That's the end of the week. That's going to do it for us on the Marijuana Times show. We'll see you all next week, of course. Thank you to NatureSideCannabis.com for sponsoring the show. Organic, all-natural pesticides. NatureSideCannabis.com. Make sure you check out the MarijuanaTimes.org for all your latest news and opinion on the cannabis community and industry and beyond. Of course, find all these videos. Keep sharing, liking them. Help us spread the truth about cannabis. And for those of you who like and share and comment on the videos and watch these videos, you all are awesome. You're helping us grow the show and spread the truth. And maybe somehow one day it'll get to Jeff Sessions. Maybe before he leaves his job, maybe not. Maybe he just needs to leave his job and leave to people who actually know what they're talking about. But again, it's the government. The government being in charge of this is the problem. It's always been the problem, and it will continue to be the problem even after legalization is widespread through this country. The government being in charge of it is going to continue to create problems. Thanks, everybody, for checking us out, watching, and listening. We'll see you next week here on the Marijuana Times Show.